We were already seated when the procession slowed. Not the loud kind of quiet, just the kind that settles when something expected doesn't happen. 4 chairs, roped off near the aisle, stayed untouched. Programs folded, names printed, no movement. We noticed because they were meant for someone. Rhea Morgan was on the program a few lines down. Innovator of the Year. The kind of title people skim past unless they know what it costs to earn it. She wasn't looking at the stage. She was looking at those chairs. This is how she remembers it. I kept my hands flat on my lap because if I didn't, I knew I'd fidget. The woman next to me leaned over and whispered, "Are your parents running late?" Her smile was polite, practiced. I shook my head once. "They're not coming." She hesitated. Oh, that was it. That was the whole exchange. She turned back to her husband, who was already lifting his phone for photos. Somewhere behind me, someone laughed too loudly. The band adjusted their tempo. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother came through without punctuation. "We just landed. Austin's coach says this could really matter for him." I stared at the screen, then locked it and slid the phone back into my bag. My name was stitched onto the edge of the program in small letters. I ran my thumb over it like it might smudge. When I stood, my knees felt loose. The dean's voice carried easily. "Today, we recognize a graduate whose work has already changed how critical systems operate." Applause rose. I stepped forward because my body knew the choreography, even if my head didn't. As I crossed the stage, I heard my father's voice from years ago, flat and certain. "You've always been good on your own." "Rhea." I reached the podium. The lights were warmer than I expected. For a second, I imagined my parents somewhere between terminals, my brother stretching his shoulders, someone saying, "Smile for the camera." We noticed then not the applause, but the way she paused before speaking, as if checking whether the silence would hold. I leaned into the microphone. "Thank you," I began, and my voice sounded like it always had. Steady. I didn't plan to say much. A few rows back. Jonah caught my eye and nodded once. That helped. "I just want to say I'm grateful for the people who showed up." I continued, even when they didn't know how big the work would get. I stepped back. The clapping returned. Uneven at first, then full. When I walked off stage, the 4 chairs were still empty. I didn't look at them again. The quiet didn't start at graduation. It had a rhythm long before that. Back home. Mornings were scheduled around Austin. Practice times taped to the fridge. Protein bars lined up by the door. My father's keys always landed in the same ceramic bowl, already pointed toward the driveway. "Eat," my mother would say, sliding a plate toward him. "You've got drills." Austin would grin, already half standing. "I'm good." I sat at the counter with my laptop open. A schematic paused mid-scroll. My father glanced over once. "Looks complicated. It's just a routing problem." I answered. "I'm trying to reduce Rhea." My mother cut in. Softer than a correction. "Can you clean up later? We're leaving in 10. For the game." My voice stayed even. My father checked his watch. Scrimmage. College scouts might stop by. He said it the same way every time, like the possibility itself was a trophy. Austin bounced on his heels, helmet under his arm. "You coming?" he asked, already knowing. "I've got a competition." I said, "State level. It starts at noon." My mother hesitated. She wiped her hands on a towel that was already clean. "You'll be fine on your own." "Right." "Yeah," I said. "I'll manage." That word again. Manage. It followed me through the house, into the car when I drove myself, into the auditorium where my name was called without echo. I won that day. I took the plaque home and set it on the dining table. They came back late, loud with the kind of tired joy that smells like grass and sweat. "Did you see that catch my father said, dropping into a chair?" Perfect timing. Austin lifted his phone. Coach filmed it. "I'll show you." My mother noticed the plaque then. She smiled. "Oh, you did well first place," I said. "That's great." "Honey," She leaned in for a quick hug, then pulled back. We'll celebrate later. Okay. Later never landed on a date. Years stacked like that. Their calendar full. Mine penciled in around the margins. I learned to pack my own lunches, drive myself, sit quietly at the edge of rooms where my name wasn't needed. On the night I left for Pittsburgh early, my father carried one box to the car. He set it down carefully. You're good at handling things, he said. Always have been. I nodded. The trunk closed. No photos. No waving. Just the sound of the engine turning over and the house staying exactly as it was when I pulled away. Pittsburgh felt temporary when I arrived, like I wasn't supposed to settle in yet. The dorm hallway smelled faintly of cleaner and burnt coffee. Someone down the hall was arguing on the phone, voice low but sharp. I dragged my suitcase in with one wheel stuck, the zipper ticking against the floor. Need a hand? I turned. A guy with dark curls and a CMU hoodie stood a few doors down, holding a toolbox. I'm good, I said, then paused. Actually, could you lift the box on top? He set the toolbox down and picked it up like it weighed nothing. I'm Jonah. Rhea. He nodded toward my open laptop on the desk. You start early? Didn't really stop. That got a small smile. Same. We didn't talk much after that. Just a quiet understanding. The kind that doesn't need filling. He went back to his room. I unpacked, plugged in my monitor, opened my code editor. It felt familiar enough to slow my breathing. That night, my phone rang. My mother. We're at dinner, she said. Plates clinked in the background. Austin had a great day. That's good. He's exhausted. But in a good way. Coach thinks he's standing out. I'm glad. A pause. Are you settled? Mostly. Well, she said, stretching the word. Call if you need anything. I won't, I said, not sharply. Just, honestly. She laughed, relieved. That's my girl. When I hung up, I stared at the wall for a long second. Then I opened a new file and named it something boring. Version 1. That's how everything important in my life seemed to start. Quiet. Unannounced. Classes moved fast. Labs ran late. My schedule filled without consulting anyone else's. Jonah and I started sitting together, then working together. No speeches, just shared screens and takeout containers. One afternoon, a text came through from my father. Proud of you. Austin heads to Dallas next month. Big opportunity. I typed back, that's great, and meant it. I also noticed he hadn't asked what I was building or who I was becoming. I set the phone face down and went back to work. The campus buzzed around me, busy with people being seen. I wasn't one of them, and for the first time, that didn't feel like a problem. By the middle of the semester, Jonah stopped knocking. He'd just slide into the chair across from mine, coffee in hand, eyes already on the screen. Sometimes he'd say, "You changed the cue logic." Other times he'd just tilt his head and wait. "That spike shouldn't be there," he said one night, tapping the trackpad. "Latency jumps every time the feed syncs." I leaned closer. "Only when the data comes from two regions at once, which means the orchestration layer's fighting itself, or protecting itself." I said, "Depends how you look at it." He grinned. "You always look at it that way." We didn't talk about grades much, or families. We talked about systems that didn't panic under pressure, about how hospitals couldn't afford delays, about how data should move like it knew where it was going. At some point, the lab lights started turning off automatically around us. A custodian paused by the door. "You kids still alive in here?" Jonah looked up. "Barely." She laughed and moved on. I checked the time and realized my phone had been face down for hours. No missed calls. No messages asking where I was. That felt normal now. We started sketching on whiteboards that didn't belong to us. Someone erased them overnight. We redrew everything from memory. "This isn't a class project anymore," Jonah said once, stepping back. "You know that." "Right, I know. What are you thinking I capped the marker? If we build it clean, it can scale without begging for attention." Meaning, Meaning it doesn't have to shout. It just has to work. He nodded, slow. Then we keep it quiet. The first time we tested it with a live data set, the room went still. Numbers rolled in smoothly. No lag. No freeze. Jonah let out a breath. Near zero latency. Don't say it like that yet. I warned. Feels like tempting fate. He smiled but didn't argue. Funding offers came later, filtered through people who spoke carefully. One of them leaned back in his chair and said, "You could attach your name to this. Make it a thing." I shook my head. Not yet. Why not? Because the work isn't finished. That wasn't the whole reason. But it was enough. I kept my role technical. Architect. Builder. Let someone else be visible. It made the rooms quieter. Decisions cleaner. One night, after everyone else left, Jonah stayed behind. He glanced at my phone, still untouched on the desk. "You ever tell them what you're doing?" I closed my laptop. They wouldn't know what to do with it. He didn't push, just nodded and helped me turn off the lights. Outside, campus was loud with people celebrating things that could be explained in a sentence. I walked back to my place thinking about systems that didn't need applause to survive. The move to Chicago happened without ceremony. One week I was sleeping on a narrow bed near campus. The next, I was standing in a high-rise overlooking the river, holding a badge that identified me only as engineering. I had hired Marcus, a veteran from the cloud infrastructure world, to be the face of the company. He wore the suit, took the lunches, and handled the founder narrative. I stayed in the back, behind the glass, where the actual power lived. "You're sure about this?" Rhea Marcus asked, gesturing to the organizational chart where his name sat at the top, while mine was buried in a holding LLC. "Once we file the S1, the SEC will require a full disclosure of beneficial owners. You can't hide forever, as long as the system stays intact until then." I replied, "I want the technology to be undeniable before the name is attached." Jonah leaned against the wall, eyes on his terminal. "She's serious. Marcus. She doesn't want a pedestal. She wants near-zero latency." The meetings were clinical. While Marcus spoke of market penetration and Series C tranches, I focused on the orchestration layer. We were building the nervous system for hospital networks and global logistics. If my code failed, heart monitors went dark and supply chains froze. I didn't have time for a public identity. My mother called during a 3 o'clock stress test. The Denver team was reporting a synchronization lag. "You sound distant." "Rhea," she said, her voice competing with the hum of the server fans. "I'm just focused." "Mom." "Well, try to look up once in a while. Austin's combine results are in. He's in the top 10 percentile for speed. We're thinking of doing a big dinner in Columbus to celebrate." "That's great. I have to go." I hung up and looked at a photo she'd sent my father and Austin, arms draped over each other's shoulders, glowing under stadium lights. I tapped the screen, but not to like the photo. I was checking the time. In 4 hours, the Chicago markets would open, and Coraline would begin processing 6 terabytes of data per second. I sat back in the dark office. My family saw Austin's speed as the only metric that mattered. They didn't know that while they were cheering in a stadium. I was quietly keeping the world's most critical systems from collapsing. I wasn't just good on my own. I was the infrastructure they didn't even know they relied on. The call came between meetings, in the thin quiet where my screen finally stopped blinking. My mother's voice arrived already tired. "We're trying to coordinate flights." "Okay. For graduation," she added, like it needed context. I rolled my chair back and stared at the ceiling. "The date's the same." "Yes." "We know." Papers shuffled. My father cleared his throat somewhere near the phone. "There's a complication." I waited. The pause stretched long enough to feel deliberate. "Austin's been invited to a showcase in Dallas. My father said, it's combine adjacent. Coaches will be there." "That's good for him. It's important," my mother said quickly. "The timing overlaps. So, you won't be there. Another pause. This one heavier. You've always been strong. Rhea, my father continued, you don't need us the way he does. I pressed my thumb into the edge of the desk. The wood was rough where the finish had worn down. I already reserved a hotel. I said, you don't have to worry about that. It's not about logistics. My mother said, we're proud of you. You know that. Do I? My father jumped in. We'll celebrate when we get back. Dinner. Something nice. I'll be busy. You're always busy, he said, not unkindly. That's just who you are. I closed my eyes. In the office across the hall, someone laughed. A door clicked shut. Send pictures, my mother offered. We'll watch the live stream. Don't. Silence settled again. My father sighed. You understand. Right. I understand. We ended the call without a goodbye. The screen lit up with the next calendar alert. Jonah leaned in the doorway, hands in his pockets. They not coming, he said. No. He nodded once. Do you want me to sit in on the next call? Move it up, I said. He didn't ask what I meant, just pulled out his phone and started typing. I looked at the empty conference room chairs through the glass. They were lined up neatly, waiting for people who thought timing was neutral. I turned back to my desk and opened a new document, the cursor blinking steady, ready for something that didn't ask a permission. The morning air in Pittsburgh was sharp, smelling of wet pavement and expensive cologne. Gowns rustled like dead leaves as 3,000 students found their places. I sat in the front row, folding my program until the crease was a sharp white line against my thumb. Jonah leaned over, his own gown slipping off his shoulder. The embargo lifts in 10 minutes, he whispered. Bloomberg has the lead. TechCrunch is second. I'm not worried about the press, I said, though my pulse was a rhythmic thrum in my throat. On stage, the dean of the School of Computer Science adjusted his glasses. He spoke of legacy and the future, words that felt distant until he reached the final award. Each year, we recognize one individual who embodies the quiet rigor of our institution. The dean began, a builder who doesn't just innovate, but stabilizes. I stood up before he even called my name. It was muscle memory. Rhea Morgan, he announced, our Innovator of the Year. The applause was standard until he continued. Rhea is the founding architect behind the Coraline Protocol. For the past 4 years, while completing her studies, she has engineered the infrastructure that now manages data for 30% of the hospital networks in this country. The ripple that moved through the crowd wasn't a cheer. It was a collective realization. In the tech world, Coraline was a ghost, a legendary, high-performance system with no face. Now, it had a name. It belonged to the woman in the black gown with the empty family seats behind her. I reached the microphone. The lights were blinding, white and clinical. I didn't look for my parents. I looked at Jonah, who was checking his watch. The embargo was over. Thank you, I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. In systems engineering, we talk about the single point of failure. We spend our lives building redundancies so that when one line breaks, the system holds. I want to thank CMU for being the redundancy I needed when my own foundation was quiet. I walked off the stage to a different kind of silence, the kind that happens right before a storm. In the corridor afterward, my phone became a live wire. Vibrations pulsed against my hip in a frantic, uneven rhythm. I stepped into a quiet alcove and finally looked. Wall Street Journal Coraline Stealth Founder revealed. $4.2 billion infrastructure giant eyes. Q3 IPO. Bloomberg Tech. The architect of Chicago meet the 26-year-old woman running healthcare's silent backbone. Then, the personal messages started flooding the screen like a dam breaking. Mother Rhea. We just saw a notification at the gate. Is that you on the news? Why didn't you tell us Father Coraline I know that company? Franklin Morgan's daughter call me immediately. Austin sis. People here are staring at their phones. What is happening? I didn't reply. I locked the screen and watched a group of graduates taking photos with their parents nearby. They were laughing, holding bouquets, anchored by people who had been there since the first day of freshman year. "They're at the airport in Dallas," Jonah said, appearing at my side. "They'll be calling all night. Let them call," I said, sliding the phone into my pocket. "I'm going back to Chicago, on my own terms." I walked past the empty roped-off chairs in the auditorium. They looked smaller now. For the first time, they didn't look like a void. They just looked like furniture. The restaurant in Chicago's West Loop was busy in that controlled, expensive way where the hum of conversation never rises to a shout. When I arrived, the host didn't ask for a name. He simply nodded toward a corner booth. They stood in unison as I approached a rehearsed, anxious choreography. My mother reached out for a light, fleeting embrace. "Rhea, you look thin. Are you eating?" "I'm working, Mom." My father cleared his throat, adjusting his blazer. "This place is quite something. It's clear you've done well for yourself." The dinner was a study in misalignment. My father leaned in, his voice dropping into the tone he used for executive talk. "I've been reviewing Coraline's HIPAA compliance and data silo architecture. In the pharmaceutical world, we handled similar regulatory hurdles. I have contacts, Rhea people in DC, and at the major labs. We could leverage those introductions. You shouldn't have to navigate the IPO alone." I looked at him, seeing for the first time how small his world was. "It's a different risk profile. Dad, we aren't selling pills. We're building the nervous system of the grid. The introductions are already made." Austin, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally looked up. "I saw the Bloomberg piece. They called you the silent architect." He let out a dry, hollow laugh. "I thought I was the one the family was betting on. Turns out I was just the loudest project." The table went still. My mother reached for his hand, but her eyes stayed on me, searching for a way back in. "We've always been proud, Rhea. We just thought you were safe, self-sufficient." I set my napkin down, the movement final. "You didn't miss my graduation because you didn't know my value. You missed it because you'd already decided whose future mattered." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that settles after a building has finally collapsed. When the check arrived, I took it before my father could reach for his wallet. "Rhea, please," he stammered. "Let me." "I've got it," I said. Signing the slip, it was the price of my own closure. I stood up and adjusted my coat, looking at the three people who shared my DNA but none of my history. "So, what now?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "Now, I keep building, and you don't get to rewrite the years you weren't there." As I walked out into the cold Chicago night, I didn't look back. Behind me, they remained in the booth, three people learning the shape of a room where I no longer waited for permission to exist. The days after Chicago moved slower than I expected. Not because anything was wrong, just because nothing was chasing me anymore. Back in the office, people kept their voices low when I walked by, then forgot and went back to arguing about deployments and timelines. That was familiar, comforting, even. Jonah dropped into the chair across from me one afternoon and slid a coffee over. "You okay?" he said, not waiting for an answer. "I am." He nodded and didn't press. That was one of the reasons we worked. Silence didn't scare either of us. I stopped answering my phone for a while. Not dramatically, just long enough to let the noise settle. When I did respond, it was brief, neutral, boundaries written in complete sentences. Work continued. The public part of the company grew louder. I stayed where I'd always been, close to the systems, close to the decisions that mattered when something broke at 2 a.m. A few weeks later, I signed papers to fund a small program, not a press release, just money moving where it was needed, support for people who reminded me of myself at that age, capable, overlooked, still showing up anyway. One evening, I stood at the window of my apartment and watched the city wind down. Cars thinning, lights going dark one by one. My phone buzzed once, a message from my mother. "Hope you're well." I let it sit, then typed back, "I am." That was true. Rhea Morgan didn't need an empty seat to define her anymore. She didn't need the room to quiet when she entered. What she needed, she'd already built piece by piece, without witnesses. And if you stayed with her this long, listening carefully, that mattered too. We did.